Nobody died in the riots. 3 people died of knife crime this weekend alone. You imagine coming home to your house that has been ripped asunder by some shitbag, and all you get from the police is a crime reference number. 50% increase in assaults against women. If you are not concerned about 500 people yesterday washing up on the shores of Britain, what things do concern you?
I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I want to get under the bonnet of the things that really interested me, that have grabbed me. I mean, Scotland Yard undercover drug squad for X amount of years, dealing with big heroin and cocaine dealers. I mean, that's just different level completely. And you're now a spokesman, a commentator for public affairs, which I think you do a great job. So I really appreciate you coming on. We will cover 2-tier policing.
There's no such thing, haven't you heard?
Well, this is what I'm looking forward to.
Get to that.
I'm looking forward to, I mean, you've sort of answered my question already, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to discussing your views on policemen dancing at gay pride, knife crime. But let's just start with policing, because essentially that is your background. That was your profession for many, many years. And I feel like the attitude towards the police has changed dramatically over the years. Now, when I was younger, I was a bit of a tearaway. But if a policeman come up to me and told me to behave myself, be quiet, empty my pockets, I would do exactly that. Now I see on the internet, if a policeman stops somebody in the street for whatever reason, they get their phone out and read them their rights and tell them they can't do X. But the respect has completely gone. So we'll cover all that. But why did you join the police force initially? What was your incentive?
Well, so I'm 16 years old. I've left school with very few qualifications. I'm living in a flat in Bleksley with my mum. My older sister's gone off to start her nursing training, and my dad was long gone. And at the time, we were all very grateful for that because he was a horror. And I'm working as a warehouseman in Woolworths in Welling, and I loved the job, carting heavy boxes around, and loved the environment, loved all the staff. I'm having a great time and earning a few quid. It's 1976, and I come home from work one day, and to my utter horror, sitting in the lounge of our flat is this enormous police officer. Turned out he was a local cop, neighbourhood, community, home beat, whatever they were called back in the day. And my mum had reached out because she knew I was getting up to little bits of silliness. Nothing major, but, the usual kind of teenage tearaway nonsense. And my mum had loftier ambitions for me than working in a warehouse at Woolworths. She thought policing might be something that would appeal to me. Well, this copper just sold the job to me, the idea of it. Of course, he was talking about the cadet corps as well, because I was only 16, so I'd have to go in the Met Police Cadets before becoming a PC. But he was telling me about the opportunities, what would happen in the cadets. You would go out with the police and do some policing. You'd learn about the law, but it was all about sport and competition. And he did a brilliant, brilliant job on selling the idea to me, as well as being a bit shrewd and a bit switched on. At one point, he asked me what music I liked. And, of course, that was a key to getting in my bedroom to see what was on the walls, see if there was an ashtray under the bed with any reefer butts in it or something like that, just getting a feel for me as a kid kind of thing. And did a great job. And before he left, he pulled out the application form, sat down, and that was it. A few short weeks later, I joined the police cadets at 17, where suddenly I got discipline, which I hadn't had at school. I'd railed against the discipline, and that's why I'd largely flunked my education. But when I got to the cadet school, most of the physical training instructors, for example, were built like you, right? They were incredibly fit, like fellas who could clearly shift some furniture. And when they said, "Oi, Bleksley, down for 10 press-ups," or what wasn't an option. Yeah, all right, Sarge. Yeah, all right. How many did you say? Yeah. Because otherwise they'd have taken you into the dojo, the judo gym, and they'd have turned you into a crowd quite happily. So, and I loved all of that. I just absolutely relished it. And I think, as well as having discipline imposed upon me, I discovered self-discipline. Getting up on time, making sure your uniform was immaculate, bulling the toe caps of your shoes, having all your PE kit with like ironing lines down the shorts and all that kind of stuff. Your plimsolls whiter than white with the old whitening stuff that we used to use on them and all that stuff. And I just relished it. I loved it. I've still got into some scrapes, of course, because I hadn't entirely ditched my somewhat rebellious nature. In fact, that stayed with me throughout my policing career and possibly my life. But essentially, I got the discipline, I respected it, I operated within it, and I grew.
Why do you think your mum had a police officer in the room rather than a mechanic or an electrician? What do you think your mum saw in you that made her think Peter will be a good policeman?
As you can see from these hands, Liam, they've never done a day's work in their lives, okay? I could not go on the tools at all. I'm not wired like that.
Right.
In fact, my wife will not let me near any kind of DIY or this, that and the other, because whenever I've tried it, I get things manifestly wrong. I break things. I'm just not technically minded. I can't put things together. Back in the old days when you had to put a plug on a new electric appliance that you'd bought, if I managed to achieve that, that was high praise indeed for me. I'm just not a practical sort of person, and my mum knew that, so I think she thought that policing would be a bit more appropriate. And back in the day, this is the mid-1970s, there was a lot of respect for the police amongst the middle-class, moderate mainstream of society. They've always been that kind of silent, huge swathe of people whose default position is to respect the police, or should I say was to respect the police. And I think my mum thought it would have been a worthy, laudable, respected job to go into.
You're very young as well, weren't you?
16.
When you joined. So you joined at 16.
Well, I was 17 when I walked through the gates, just by a few days.
And how old did you have to be before you could actually be a bobby on the street?
18 and a half. So I spent a year at Hendon in the cadet school.
Yeah.
Took some O-levels, so I got a couple of O-levels to my name, in addition to the couple that I'd got at school. Did a lot of fitness and all that kind of stuff. Did quite a bit of police study as well, the basic sort of police study. And then for the last 6 months, I actually got posted to a police station. I went to Norbury Police Station in southeast London. It's sort of between like Streatham and Croydon, Norbury. And I loved it. I mean, you were the cadet, so I made a lot of cups of tea and all that kind of stuff. And I did have the station stamp put on my backside one night, when they pull your trousers down and all that kind of game. But I loved it. And, nicked people, was proactive. I was very fit. So I could usually chase the burglars quicker than the lumbering PCs who I left far behind. And, just thoroughly enjoyed it. And I knew that policing was the thing I wanted to do.
And where were you born and raised?
Bexley Heath.
Because Bexley Heath and Norbury, they're very different places, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. But the real shock for me came at the end of my stint at Norbury when I was 18 and a half. I then went back to Hendon. So you then get sworn in as a PC. Did my training there, 16 weeks at Hendon. So I'm just about 19 now, and I get posted to Peckham. Now, Peckham was very different from Bexley Heath and was a lot earthier, tougher than Norbury. It had a large Afro-Caribbean population. Peckham borders on Brixton, so they were similar kind of demographics in that regard. And, if I thought I'd been a bit of a Jack the Lad hard nut with my old schoolmates in Bexley Heath, when I got to Peckham, I realised I was a complete marshmallow.
And what year would this have been?
1978.
So that's 3 years before the Brixton riots.
Yes.
There's probably no one better to ask than you how those riots erupted. Did you feel the tensions building? Was it a surprise that happened?
No, none at all. In Peckham, amongst a considerable number of the police officers that I worked alongside, there was rampant racism, I'm afraid to say. And I've upset a lot of old Bill over the years by telling the truth about it and telling the truth about Brixton. A lot of them did and probably still will get their knickers in a twist over me telling the very uncomfortable truths of the matter. You know, we had a sergeant whose expression was black and white, stop on sight. So if you had a black kid and a white kid, you would always stop them and search them because, of course, they didn't want integration. Why would a white boy have a black boy as a mate? You know, that's how racist it was. And that was his expression. And he'd drive around, see a black face and a white face walking together, black and white, stop on sight, turn your pockets out, all that kind of stuff. The very first night I went out at Peckham Police Station, we went to do a search. I was chomping at the bit. Actually, you weren't allowed out on the streets until your 19th birthday. But I was driving the inspector and the sergeants mad because I wanted to get out on the streets. It seemed to me lunacy because I'd been on the streets as a cadet. So why couldn't I go out on the streets now as a PC? Why did I have to wait for my 19th birthday? That just seemed like ridiculous. Anyway, I wore them down and they said, right, okay, you're going on this search. They said to me, stick to that PC like glue. Wherever he goes, you go. Fair enough, that's all understood. You know, this is my first search, my first day out as a PC. Anyway, when we got into this, it was in a basement club. So they were called blues clubs in those days. And it was a party, but it was illegal because they charged people on the door and they're charging people for the booze. And of course, it's completely unlicensed premises. So it's an illegal kind of gig. And of course, there's plenty of people having a spliff in there, you know, and overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, people were black at this party. So we go crashing in. The PC that I'm with makes his way to the DJ station. Now, it sounds a bit glamorous, but it was a couple of big speakers, you know, and a deck and his records. And this PC systematically went through every record and stamped on them. Right, and it's like, oh, right, okay, not what I was expecting. Out of his truncheon pocket, in those days, we had a truncheon pocket inside our trousers because you weren't allowed to wear your truncheon on open display. So you had a long, narrow pocket in your trousers. He pulls out a knitting needle from his truncheon pocket and sticks it straight through the middle of the speakers. Right through the middle, so thereby rendering them absolutely useless. And he thought that was more subtle than actually smashing them to bits. I never kind of got why he wanted to be subtle with the speakers and yet stamp on all the records. You know, I can't speak for the machinations of his idiotic brain, but that was what went on. You know, loads of people, as the old Biller come through the door, have ditched their bit of weed on the ground. Well, suddenly that night I discovered that weed can fly because police officers were picking it up and sticking it into people's pockets and going, right, you're nicked. You know, and those were just examples of the racism and the policing that was imposed upon the black community. And these now, generally speaking, are like second generation. So the Windrush generation has come over in the 50s and 60s, and these are the kids of the Windrush generation. And as I say, policing was imposed upon them. It wasn't by consent or anything like that. And if you happen to be a young black lad in Peckham or Brixton, come to that matter, or some other parts of London where there were sizable Afro-Caribbean communities, then if your face didn't fit and you failed the attitude test, you could quite possibly be fitted up and beaten up. So you'd get a false conviction against your name and you get slapped about in the back of the van for good measure and all. So that was kind of like the policing that I witnessed and I saw. Some police officers absolutely made a living out of it. You know, they were really driven by it, by fitting up young black men. They relished in it and they loved it. Well, pretty quickly I developed a copper's nose for criminality anyway, so I didn't have to follow in the shoes of a certain couple of police officers who will remain nameless, but anybody who's listening to this and was around us in Peckham in the late 70s and isn't afraid of the uncomfortable truths and will look in the mirror and go, actually, yes, Blex was right, will know who I'm talking about. I managed to nick people legitimately. I was, dare I say it myself, and forgive the self-aggrandizement, but I was pretty good. You know, I knew how to nick a criminal. I knew what a criminal looked like, walked like, talked like, how they behaved, and how they commit their crimes.
But honourable as well. You didn't need to fit people up to get you nicking.
Yeah, but by the same token, I did get swept along with the racism. You know, and I was pretty much a vile, racist thug, if the truth be known. I was a pretty nasty piece of work, but there were others who were even nastier. No one comes out of it with any credit, apart from the few cops that rose above it, behaved honourably, and of course there were those as well.
Why do you think that ex-old Bill, of your age and above, take umbrage to you speaking about racism within the police force in the 70s and 80s? Because, I'm 44, and for me it's common knowledge that was the case. All you got to do is watch a film like Scum, that was produced back then, and just listen to the language that was acceptable. That should tell you enough that racism back then was definitely rife.
Some people are in denial. They're in complete denial. I've had all the hatred, all the vitriol, all the pile-ons you can imagine. I've been booted out of every ex-old Bill Facebook page, kind of social group, and I was unceremoniously dumped out of the Metropolitan Police ex-CID Detectives Association a few years ago when I told all this truth because I'd taken part in a BBC documentary and they all went mental. Okay, to those who didn't partake in that kind of behaviour, who were honourable, if they felt that I was tarring them with that brush, well, they want to read it a bit more carefully and listen a bit more carefully, pay a bit of attention and don't be so easily offended. However, I got a phone call from a former senior officer who was the chair of the Ex-Detectives Association, and she rang me up and she said, oh, hello, Peter. She said, the committee met last night and they ruled that by virtue of your article in the paper and what you said in the TV show, you have brought the association into disrepute, so we're kicking you out. Right, well, I chuckled then, like I just chuckled now because I still find it hysterically funny. Well, so I turned around to her and I said, okay. I said, thank you very much for ringing me, and not doing it by email or text, I appreciate that. And I did appreciate that she'd had the balls to pick up the phone and speak to me. But I turned around and said, before you go, I said, can we just clarify one thing? And that is that as far as your association is concerned, telling the truth is disreputable. Have I got that right? And of course there's silence at the other end because I could hear her brain turning over thinking, what on earth is she going to say? Because I put her on the spot. I told the truth and they think that's disreputable. And she just said, well, the committee's made it. Yeah, I said, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Of course I did. I mean, exactly, I put her on the spot. I said, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But anyway, thanks very much for the phone call. Cheers, ta-da. And then I kind of chuckled like I do now. But yeah, if they're delicate and if they're flaky and if they're in denial, then that really is not my problem.
But it's not as if you've said it was them, not me. You've openly said you got swept into that whole mindset of
being a racist. Yeah, yeah. Fitting people up was not my game. In Peckham, there was enough criminality going on, for you to be able to legitimately arrest people. There was enough burglars whose doors we could kick in. There was enough people carrying knives that we could stop and search and nick. And I didn't think that you had to reduce yourself to fitting up young black men who were waiting for a bus. But I come out of it with no credit in so much as that, I'd got swept along by it and I had become racist. I'd followed that lead. But that was all to change because in 1981 at Brixton, where there was a lot of the new kind of crime that had been called mugging, and I hate that word. It's robbery. It's robbery, but it still is used in the media from time to time, and it was very much a word of the time. And essentially, the victims tended to be elderly white women, and the perpetrators tended to be young black men. So tensions were very, very high around that kind of crime. And in order to try and quell that, in order to try and deal with what was regarded as the drugs problem in Brixton and the knives, Operation Swamp was launched in Brixton. And it did what it said on the tin. They gathered up just about any officer they could from any other role, put them into plain clothes and swamped Brixton. If it moved, it got stopped and it got searched. And over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, the tensions just rose and rose and rose. And we're at Camberwell on a Friday afternoon, 10 or 12 of us in a people carrier, going to hotspots of crime at Peckham and East Dulwich, vehicle crime, whatever it was. It's been a very, very long week. We've dropped some people off early, Poets' Day, piss off early tomorrow's Saturday. So they've gone to get their cars and all that sort of stuff. And there was, I think, only about 3 or 4 of us left in the van when a shout for urgent assistance went up at Roughton Road in Brixton. We tear our up to Roughton Road, and when we get there's already a standoff, and tensions are very, very high. What apparently had happened not long before was that a young black man had been stabbed in the back, and a police officer, in an effort to quell the bleeding or to stem the bleeding, had knelt on this young man's back, put his knee over the wound. And some people had construed that as yet another brutal arrest of a black man. And it kind of kicked off, and we were there that Friday night. A few bricks and a few bottles got thrown, and it was all a bit unpleasant. We thought it was going to kick off wholesale. Then we all got dragged off the streets, taken to Brixton police station, told to wait, and then thereafter, idiotically, told to patrol in a never-ending loop that went down Roughton Road, down to Tulsehill, back up sort of through the other part of Brixton, and just patrolling this loop all night. We weren't allowed to get out the vehicles, stop people, search people, engage with anybody. And of course, all we were that night was a very red rag to a very angry bull. And again, it just heightened the tensions. And the following day, it all kicked off wholesale. Brixton burnt. We got absolutely pelted. And when I got home and sort of looked in the mirror and gathered my thoughts, I'd seen people on that other side of that shield who wanted to kill me because of the cloth that I wore and the symbol of oppression that represented. And they really wanted to kill me. And I thought about who I'd become. I thought about the racism. I thought about the fitting up. And I decided that that's it. I'm done with wearing this uniform. I don't want to wear it anymore. I really did have a long, hard look and think about myself and all those sort of matters over sort of a number of days. And when I got back to work on a Monday, I think I was in Brixton on the Sunday. On the Monday, I applied to get out of uniform and join the crime squad because I just didn't ever want to wear a uniform again. And from that day on, I have not uttered a racist word, committed a racist deed, or had a racist thought. It had a very deep and profound effect upon me that weekend, which changed me fundamentally for the better.
We've just recently had riots up and down the country.
Yeah.
But just describe Brixton riot as it was in real time.
It burned. On the Friday night when we were told to patrol and do nothing, we saw people with crates of milk bottles. Milk was delivered in bottles in those days. And we saw them with crates of empty milk bottles going into basement flats. And we knew exactly what was going on. They were being filled with petrol and turned into petrol bombs. And the following day, Brixton burnt. On that Friday night, a woman flagged us down. She was the landlady of a pub. She opened up the back doors of the carrier and slid a crate of light ales into the back of our carrier. She said, there you go, boys, with a bottle opener. So we could have a beer as we were patrolling round and round and round for hours and hours and hours. The following day, her and her husband were tied up, doused in petrol, and the pub was set on fire and razed to the ground. They escaped with their lives, very, very fortunately. It was horrendous.
And when you say Brixton burnt, are we talking buildings, houses, flats, cars?
Buildings, cars, countless cars. Over 200 police officers were injured. Just about every shop in Brixton got looted. All the windows smashed in, from jewellers to clothing shops to you name it. Brixton got utterly trashed. And Ken Livingstone, who was a very prominent and very left-wing politician, later went on to be mayor of London, said at the time, the police got a bloody good hiding. And he was right. It was horrendous. And it made the recent riots, which of course I don't condone and I don't downplay, and anybody who partook in those I think is an idiot, but it made those riots kind of pale into insignificance in terms of the amount of damage that was done.
And what about the aftermath? Did the police come down as hard as they have done recently?
Well, interestingly, you see, Brixton is only 4 miles from Westminster, the Houses of Parliament, Downing Street and all of that. So I think there are a lot of concerns amongst the establishment, the powers that be, the politicians, that if that rioting was to spread, how close to the seat of power would it get? So a lot of very senior politicians came down, and a public inquiry was launched, which was led by a fairly liberal kind of judge called Lord Scarman. And the Scarman report actually did some good. It really did some good. It was a precursor to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act coming in 1984. And the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, in one foul swoop, made it incredibly difficult for those police officers who had fitted up young black men in the past. It made it almost impossible for them to carry out those kind of atrocious kind of and criminal acts again. So the Scarman report and what came of it actually really did some good for society.
I remember Brixton, Peckham, it tended, from my recall, to get rougher and rougher the closer you got to Streatham and Brixton. Is that accurate, or is that how I remember it?
Brixton was tough, and there was a lot of poverty there, and of course it had become home to the Afro-Caribbean population, and words like ghettos were bandied about and all of that, and there was a lot of poor people in poor housing living pretty rubbish lives, to be honest with you.
Did you see much violence?
There was violence, but nothing like the levels that we see today. Certainly, you know, if there was a stabbing, that would kind of become a major incident and the CID would turn out. They might form a little squad to deal with it, whereas stabbings, tragically now, are an everyday occurrence just about everywhere. Wherever you go, the length and breadth of the country, the scourge of knife crime runs rampant. And stabbings and knife crime murders, I think, way outstrip today what we had back then.
I want to talk about some of your undercover work, but then I want to talk about recent events with you. I know you went undercover with LSD. You've bought big sleeves of acid, cocaine. I've noticed that you know the lingo particularly well.
I did at the time, yeah.
You've not hidden the fact that you've used it.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you not if you're going undercover? If they pull it out and say, try that, you can't say, oh, sorry, not today.
Well, you can do, because when you're working undercover and you're negotiating with some very, very lively people, some of whom are professional businessmen, others whom are psychotic lunatics with a 9mm down the back of their trousers, and just about everything in between, the one thing you really don't want to be is off your nut on gear. You really want to have all your wits about you. But on those occasions when I was finally really forced into a corner, because if I didn't take that little bit of gear, or if I didn't have a bang on that bifter, it would be a deal breaker, and the millions of pounds worth of gear wouldn't be seized, wouldn't be found, and people wouldn't be nicked. Then, if I was really, really metaphorically backed into a corner, then I might take a bit of gear. But ideally, swerve it at all costs.
Who was predominantly moving the cocaine back in the day? Because what are we talking, mid-80s?
Yeah, so I went after I finished at Peckham. I was fortunate enough to become a detective. I went to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, very nice. Worked there as a detective and went up to the Yard on their drug squad in 1985. So the whole cocaine explosion onto the streets of Britain was actually happening. This was it. And of course, it was predominantly coming in from South America, and everybody was scrapping over getting a piece of the action. Because the old school gangsters that used to sit at the top of the criminal tree, the armed blaggers, you know, they were the premier villains, the ones who went over the pavement and robbed the money boxes or the bank, you know, Securicor and all that kind of stuff. They were the top level criminals. In the 80s, the Met Police had a pretty decent habit of shooting them dead. And so, of course, armed robbery was losing its allure for a lot of people because there was that chance if the old Bill knew about it, they'd rock up and kill you. Coupled with the fact you were likely to get a 30 or a 35 wrapped round you, suddenly this new drug cocaine was landing on our shores. It wasn't in the grip of the Afro-Caribbean population, which cannabis up until that point largely had been, and it became a bit of a free-for-all. And, of course, gangsters suddenly were reinvesting their money into that, where they were thinking then you won't get shot and the punishments might be less severe. Why not? The risks were lower, the profits were higher, and nobody had to put a stocking over their head and take a sawn off onto the pavement. So it was kind of natural, and we saw the explosion of it. And we kind of foolishly thought that we were keeping a bit of a lid on it, but we weren't in any way, shape or form. And the squad kept increasing in size because of the demand and the successes we were having. But that just reflected the fact that there was more gear out there to seize and more people to nick because the industry was becoming vast. Not as vast as it is today, when the illegal drugs industry is the fourth biggest industry in the world. So basically we were pissing in the wind and wasting our time all those years ago. But nonetheless, it was still very much a growing industry.
Tell me about how dangerous it was to actually be in the eye of the storm. You're actually undercover in amongst all these people thinking, shit, I could actually get caught out any day.
On occasions, rare occasions, I might be in a nice hotel or a nice restaurant negotiating. But generally speaking, I ended up in shitty boozers or down dark alleyways or in gloomy pub car parks or in drug dealers' flats where I was hugely outnumbered and there was a lot of faces kind of scowling at me. So, yeah, it wasn't overly glamorous. A lot of the time it was extremely nerve-wracking. But, you know, I was young, I was fit, I was fearless, I had the gift of the gab, I had a propensity for telling lies, and I was convincing. So all I was doing was using what talents I had to carry out that role in working undercover. And a lot of the time, well, particularly, you know, as I would find myself legging it down the road and behind me I'm leaving a scene of chaos as my team colleagues have leapt on the bad guys, they've seized the parcel and I've legged it over a fence. You know, happy days. I mean, great fun, boys' own stuff. It really was. It was incredibly exciting a lot of the time. And of course, at the end of it, my colleagues have got to deal with all the prisoners and the drugs and any weapons that have been seized and money and all that kind of stuff. I've got to get back to a police building somewhere, write up all my notes and this, that and the other. Then I'm ready to go on the piss. I can go and celebrate now, you know. And somebody would be delegated to go with me. And we had some good times, you know. And,
how would you infiltrate these gangs? How would you know they existed, and what would your approach be?
The majority of the time, I was introduced by an informant. That is invariably what would happen. Sometimes, if you knew that the villains had this boozer or that club, you might go and frequent that place with a view to try and inveigling your way into their company. But that, of course, is a much more longer-term game and comes with a lot more risks. It's so much easier if a trusted criminal who's working as an informant rocks up to a meeting and goes, Bill, meet Peter. Peter's all right. I'll vouch for him. And then you take it forward and then you carry on with the negotiations. Of course, that criminal is going to be hyper paranoid about me. And they were always so paranoid because they're staring down the barrel of a very lengthy jail term if it all goes Pete Tong. So they were very, very twitchy and nervous, and I've got stuck up against walls and searched for wires and all that kind of stuff more times than I can shake a stick at. But you build a relationship with people. You know, the most important muscle I had was my tongue, and I would talk my way into their confidence, gain some credibility, spend time with them, become believed and be believable. And then, lo and behold, you'd end up negotiating, which was often very, very tricky because the villains would not want to release the parcel. They'd want to keep control of it under their kind of circumstances and according to their rules. And that didn't always suit our objectives of trying to get the parcel out into the open, so to speak, so we could trace where it had come from, who might be involved in the transportation, the storage and the such like. But it was, it was 10 years or so of ripping yarns, lots of excitement, lots of celebrations, plenty of fear and terror, and thinking, crikey, how'd I get away with that?
How do you become, not that I'm looking to apply, but how do you become a police informer? Do they come to you or do you go to them?
People become police informants for a variety of reasons. The most obvious one is when someone's nicked and they're looking at a 20 and they go, I don't want to do 20 years in prison. So if you give me bail, I'll work my ticket sort of thing. And if they do put up a lot of information and lots of drugs or stolen goods or other crimes are solved and contraband is seized, whatever that may be, whether it's counterfeit or stolen or drugs or weapons and all of that, then when you go to court for crimes that would normally attract a 20-year jail sentence, a letter goes into the judge detailing what you've done, who's been arrested as a result, what's been seized as a result, what crimes may have been solved as a result. And then, of course, only the judge and the prosecution know about it. Defence will be brought into the loop, obviously. But certainly those in the public gallery won't. And they usually try to get those sentencings carried out without too many people in the public gallery. And you might be looking at a 20 stretch and you might get 2. Or you might even get a suspended sentence if you were looking at 8 or 10 years. You know, that's how good the discount can be for becoming an informant. Other people did it for the money because the money was good. You know, I paid out tens upon tens of thousands of pounds to some informants. One informant of mine ended up setting himself up in an antiques business. He earned so much money out of it and then gave it all up and was a successful antique dealer until his dying day. He made that much money out of it, bought a shop, filled it full of antiques and lived a good living. And other people do it for the buzz because they love it. Other people do it because they want revenge on someone. Someone shafted them and they decide that the best way to get their revenge is by having the police arrest them and charge them with very serious offences, possession of drugs or weapons or contraband, whatever that may be. So there's a variety of reasons. But I have to say this, it's a very risky business. 2 informants that I worked with both ended up getting murdered. It comes with considerable risks. Now, being a police informant in that way, I regard as being entirely different from somebody who courageously would come forward, say, for example, in a murder case. If we look at that dreadful murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the 9-year-old who got shot in Liverpool a couple of years ago, you know, a member of the public very courageously came forward and told what they knew, and as a result had to enter into the witness protection programme, which is entirely separate thing from, being an informant in the manner that I've just laid out in the previous few minutes. People that do that are courageous. They will be supported for the rest of their lives. They won't necessarily live in a life of luxury, but they will certainly live at least a life comparable to what they had, if not a little bit better, in terms of, material wealth and such like.
Yeah. So if you're old Bill and you've got an informer, you're then classed as a handler.
Yeah.
So both got to tread quite carefully because they've got to bond and trust each other, because either one of you could really ruin things for the other person, couldn't you? It seems real dodgy ground, both sides.
Handling informants is a skill that requires a firm hand, sometimes wrapped in a velvet glove, but you have to be very switched on to the fact that you could be being played, you could be being exploited, and some police officers have got themselves in awful trouble over the years by ending up having inappropriate relationships with informants. I never had that problem, because to me, deep down, and I never lost sight of it, they were always rotten, stinking grasses, and I was very glad that they weren't friends of mine. However, professionally, get on with it, deal with them, let them think you're their mate, treat them well, but don't cross that line. It's very tricky. I'm not sure how much informant handling the modern police service does, to be honest with you, because it's so fraught with risk. I'm sure the National Crime Agency probably still maintain a wide network of informants, but I'm sure any police officer these days would rather receive information through monitoring somebody's phone than having to handle an informant who could go rogue. So I can see why police would lean towards technical rather than informant handling, although I'm sure there's probably still a fair few on the books of the National Crime Agency, if not some police services.
Heroin.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to go into story after story after story after story. I mean, I would love to sit here all day, but I have to remember you've done a lot of these interviews, so there are other places to listen to more stories in depth about you going undercover.
Buy my books or listen to the audio books. My autobiography is called The Gangbuster. If you jump onto Amazon and just search for books by Peter Bleksley, and all 4 books that I've written are up there, both as audio and paperbacks.
Yeah, there you go. So if you want to hear more in-depth stories about Peter's work, go and buy his books or listen to the audiobooks, which is what I would do. But I do want to delve into, before we move on to more current affairs, I don't know many people that have been involved in the heroin game. I know 101 people that have been involved in cocaine because it's now socially acceptable. But my dad, he slipped into a coma for a week due to a heroin overdose. So I've been in smack dens. I've had to step over pissy, shitty mattresses and dodge needles on the floor. You see enough of that, it's going to start rotting your brain and become very depressing. So I wanted to ask, did you ever use heroin?
No, not willingly, shall we say. And you're right to point out what a skanky, horrible drug it is. In fact, I haven't been anywhere near an illegal drug for over 20 years. I did have my dalliances and all of that. And to be perfectly honest with you, ever since I stepped away from having any involvement in taking any drug, my life has never been better. And that is advice I would like people to listen to. At the end of the day, I've been in so many rooms, bars, clubs, pubs with people on the bugle, on the sniff, on the Charlie, on the cocaine, who think they are the most important person in the room when they are banging on the gear and banging on about anything and everything. Matter of fact, they are the most tedious, tiresome, boring person in the world. Likewise, somebody who's on their 3rd bifter and has actually convinced themselves that they understand modern jazz whilst eating whilst eating 4 boxes of Maltesers. They're also pretty frigging tiresome and all. And everything in the midst, and I've done my own body weight in just about every bit of gear known to man. And you know what? Sack it, people, please. I'm not going to be a Puritan. I'm not going to lecture anybody. But believe you me, the further you get away from gear, the better your life gets. Anyway, back on to Smack, Skag, Brown, and all the Horse and all the other names it's had over the years. Yeah, we didn't see, because we were Scotland Yard's top drug investigative unit, we didn't deal with a lot of dealers. We were always operating at that sort of wholesale level and above. But when I was at Kensington, I certainly did, as a working in the CID office. You know, we'd kick in a lot of doors in Earl's Court to poor, unfortunate, hapless drug addicts on the Smack. And one particular fella that will never leave me is a guy whose arms were shot to pieces because he's injected so much heroin. His legs were shot to pieces. All his veins were just like collapsed, gone in a dreadful mess. And he was actually, oh my word, he was injecting into his groin because that was about the only place he could do. So there was pretty much nothing left on his body that he hadn't wrecked. And one afternoon, I was at the Gatwick Hilton dealing in a very long and complicated drugs deal, and a geezer delivered 15 kilos of it to me, all in half-kilo bags, so 30 half-kilo bags, which I took up to a hotel room which was wired for sound and video. We'd already knew this was the location for the deal to go down, and he sat in the room with me, and I went through all 30 bags with a Stanley knife, so make a tiny little hole in each one of these, kind of like balls they were, take a tiny little bit of the Smack out on the tip of the blade of the Stanley knife, then pour that into a line on a freshly torn off piece of silver foil, and then with a cigarette lighter, leaning back from it, burn the heroin through running the flame underneath the foil. Exactly what a heroin addict would do if they were smoking it, except they, of course, would roll up a £10 note or have a straw and inhale the flames as the heroin was burnt. I was just burning it because I wanted to see how it burned. Because generally speaking, the rule of thumb was the more sugars in it, in other words, the more cutting agents that have been put into the heroin, the greater the scarring will be on the foil. So lots of scarring, lots of brown shit, not very good gear. Very little scarring, very little brown shit, very good gear. I did this 30 times because it was my job within this undercover operation to weigh and test and then reseal all the parcels. But when we'd done all 30, the bloke had really got the hump by that stage, really got fed up with it, not the hump, just fed up with how long it was taking. It took me about 3 or 4 hours. I had a thumping headache because, of course, I've burnt heroin 30 times. And whilst I've not been over it, trying to get a lungful of it, I've kept it at arm's length. It was still inevitable that I must have taken some element of it and entered my bonds. So when I'd resealed them all and stuck them all back in the hold all and stuck them away, I said to him, come on, we go down to the bar and we'll celebrate, have a drink at the start of what is going to be a brilliant and incredibly fruitful and profitable business relationship. These were top players, these people were. And he said, yeah, great, go, let's go down to the bar and this, that and the other. So I come out of the hotel room with him. I've got a thumping headache. I go to the lift to get the lift out of the bar, at which point all the armed police jumped out and jumped on us and jumped on me and handcuffed us and took him away and all that kind of game. So, but my headache did eventually wear off, certainly in time for me to go out and have a celebratory pint a bit later on that night.
And when you were doing that back in the day, what nationality were the people that were serving it?
I came up against a lot of British people who were moving into the industry or had got a toehold, but Jamaicans, Indians, Colombians, French, Swiss. Yeah, we operated against all types.
What about the Smack? Was there different nationalities that preferred different drugs?
Well, those villains that bought me that 15k were Irish.
Right.
Because it's a global industry, you see, and it's all a case of who's got the contacts and who's willing to travel, who's got the balls to travel. In those days, did you have the balls to travel down to meet with the Mujahideen, as they were called, before they became the Taliban? It was a global industry, and it requires global players.
And just to end the drugs conversation, just tell me your views on the war on drugs, should we call it, and your views on the decriminalisation of Class A drugs.
The war that cannot and will not ever be won. The Misuse of Drugs Act was passed in 1971. It was a response to what then was President Richard Nixon giving a speech to the UN, the United Nations, when he said that illegal drugs were public enemy number one. And the media then coined the expression war on drugs. And we've been fighting this stupid, unwinnable war ever since. And I dedicated a large part of my life to it. And it was all a complete and utter waste of time. The industry has got bigger. There's more profits in it. There's more bloodshed, more lives lost. Prohibition, in other words, having drugs as an illegal commodity, is not the way. What we need to do, both nationally and globally, is to legalise and regulate the entire industry. Please, anybody, if you're going to say Peter's making sense, I'm going to use his words, then kindly never separate, legalise and regulate. Use those three words all the time. Because if you're trying to have a conversation with Mrs. Miggins, who lives in a comfortable and very nice Cotswold cottage and who's read the Daily Mail for the last 60 years, where all the headlines have screamed, drugs are evil, drugs are terrible, drugs will kill you, none of which really is manifestly true. All right, drugs will kill some people, but only a tiny, tiny proportion of those who use them. Then when you say legalise, you'll go, no, because it will conjure up the completely wrong idea in her head of what legalising is. So legalise and regulate. Yeah, make it like aspirin, paracetamol. Sell it in regulated stores, which I will unimaginatively call drugstores, that have to be on every high street and have to be open 24 hours a day. Because if we beat the criminals on three fronts, price, purity and availability, then the villains will have nowhere to go. I could talk about this subject for hours. I frequently do. But the drug law reform movement is gaining traction. It's slow. This race isn't going to be run in a year or maybe a decade. But growing support for legalising and regulating drugs is happening. There are millions of people tonight that will have a toot or a smoke in the UK. They hold down jobs. They raise wonderful kids that contribute to society. They don't break the law in any other way, shape or form, but they like a bit of gear. Because at the end of the day, changing our mental state is what makes us human. It's why some people have 2 sugars in their tea. It's why some people go to the gym like you. Like some people have a bar of chocolate or an ice cream. We do all of these things. Read a book, watch a movie, go to a comedy store. We do all of these things to change our mental state. So taking drugs is a very kind of human thing to do. I don't encourage it, I don't condone it, and I refer to what I said earlier. Don't do it. But I know that millions of people won't take any notice of what I say. So it's pointless. Legalise, regulate, raise billions upon billions in revenue with which we can build decent prisons and close down all those shitholes like Wandsworth and Wormwood Scrubs and all that kind of stuff. Spend billions on rehabilitating people when they're banged up. Free up huge amount of space on the prison estate. And most importantly, Rip the industry out of the vice-like grip of organised crime. Go and buy your drugs from a licensed retail outlet on the high street that won't encourage you to take more drugs, more dangerous drugs, more addictive drugs, and will actually give you some advice about that you are going to take. It's a health matter, it's a law enforcement matter, it's a revenue matter, and it will happen. If it doesn't happen in my lifetime, and I fear it might not, I'm now 64, it will happen in my kid's lifetime.
There are countries that have decriminalised Class A drugs, and it's proven to be quite successful.
Portugal have been the leaders in as much as that they've kind of done some form of decriminalisation. Yeah, of course, America have decriminalised cannabis in certain states. At the moment, because the data is very raw and pretty new, unfortunately, arguments can be made both for prohibition and against prohibition using the same data, unfortunately. But there is an inevitability about it all. We cannot carry on with this madness, with so many lives being lost, with so many gangsters getting richer and richer and richer, and so much violence being carried out on the streets of our country. Let's look at this knife crime epidemic that we've got. So much of it, that teenage bloodshed, which is flowing through our streets, so much of it is to do with enforcing territory, drug dealing territory. It's about drugs. Hello, wake up. It's about drugs, but the politicians don't want these uncomfortable conversations. There's very few that have got the balls to actually stand up and say, yeah, legalisation and regulation is the way forward. It's too easy for them to go, no, keep locking them up. Really? You've got no prison space, right? Keep locking them up. Really? We've got more drugs than ever on the streets. Keep locking them up. Really? We've got more teenagers dying because they're enforcing their territorial rules upon other people so they can protect their little patch. Lock them up. Really? How are you getting on with county lines? Well, we closed 3 down last week. Yeah, and guess what? 4 more started. It's all bollocks. It goes on and on and on and on. Legalisation and regulation is inevitable. Whenever it happens, it will happen. The sooner we do it, the better.
What do you think people in recovery would think about that? People that are battling addiction. I'm sitting here thinking, would it reduce addiction? Would it increase addiction? You must have thought about this.
I think there will be a curiosity spike after we've had the legalisation, when anybody can walk into my unimaginatively named drugstore. I think there may be a curiosity spike. But we'll have to deal with that. The long-term benefits are going to be vast. And because so many drugs are prohibited, like the psychedelics and stuff, certain scientists who plough on with research, even though it's not properly funded, because, again, they're illegal, are beginning to unlock some wonderful attributes that these drugs have in terms of people with PTSD and other trauma. There is so much about these drugs that we simply don't know about because they've all been branded illegal. There may be many other really good uses for some of these. Look at the uses of heroin, the opium poppy, morphine. Ask anybody who's had a knee replacement, a hip replacement, or any other hugely painful
They wanted the
procedure.
other knee gone.
What are they on? They're on morphine. Hello, a derivative of the opium poppy, heroin, right? That's what you're on. That's been derived from that. If we start exploring all the other drugs, who knows what medical benefits might be achieved from those as well.
I'll tell you something else I've admired about you when watching all your work is how open you are about mental health. So if we can just, before we go on to current affairs, round up your career in the police force with how it all come to an end, and then we will touch base on mental health, because a lot of people talk about mental health, but not a lot of people are completely qualified to talk about it. I think it will help a lot of people, but even if it just helps one person, that's kind of what this podcast is about. So how did it all come to an end, your career within the police force?
Well, that heroin job I was telling you about in the Gatwick Hilton, at the time, that 15 kilos of heroin, and this is almost laughable, was the largest landside seizure of heroin in the UK ever, right? It was a very big job. Of course, it's all been dwarfed now. And unfortunately, it was a multi-agency job that involved the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency from the States, the Garda Síochána of the Irish Police, Customs and Excise, police, and it went on and on and on. And it was very complicated, as they are when there's ego-driven senior police officers fighting over a slice of the pie. On the front line, where me and the other bloke from Customs were working undercover, we had it all going along swimmingly. Anyway, there was a big powwow going on. So a detective sergeant was asked to write a report, what was called a briefing note, detailing the whole operation. This is all unbeknown to me. And he did. And the clown put my real name in that report, not my code number that was issued to me by the undercover unit. He put my real name. And Bleksley is a very unusual name, especially spelt the way that mine is. And he repeated my name in this report about 8 times in bold, bloody block capital letters, right? So as if that wasn't bad enough, he then printed the document off, took it out of a police station, right, which he shouldn't have done. He then put it in a briefcase in a car when he went shopping after work, right, which he shouldn't have done. And by now, everybody's guessing what comes next. Oh, yes, that car got broken into and the report got stolen. We already knew there was a plot to kill me because when the bad guys had been banged up, they'd worked on the theory that if they killed me, they'd kill the evidence anyway. And to a certain degree, they were quite right. So now, if you combine the pre-existing conspiracy to kill me with this report that's got my name in it many times, if you put those two things together, it would be very easy to find me and then kill me. So very hurriedly, I had to abandon my home, abandon my life, abandon my identity, and I was parachuted into the Witness Protection Programme, where I lived for 2 years, continued to work undercover, and had a miserable frigging time of it. Really miserable time of it. I would sit there and conspiracy theorise as to how my life had imploded and come to all of this. I drank too much, I smoked too much, and after 2 years of trying to deal with all this crap, I had a catastrophic mental health breakdown and I was hospitalised in a lock-in psychiatric unit. I wasn't sectioned because I went there voluntarily, albeit I was very, very ill. I'd assaulted someone, a matter of deep regret and shame, which was an indicator of just how unwell I was. After 3.5 weeks of being in that unit and being given some medication, which back in the day, because I'm talking about the mid-1990s now, was pretty kind of raw and uncomplicated meds. The meds are so much better these days than they were back in those days. However, this medication worked. I did start to show signs of improvement and I was released, but I was discharged from the hospital, still very much under the medical care. And in that medical care, I've had loads of things: acupuncture, cognitive behavioural therapy, all manner of stuff, and therapy, counselling, and all of that. And there is no shame in any of it. I then had another mental health breakdown in about 2004, which required hospitalisation once again. I'd kind of stopped taking the meds, you know what I mean? I only got myself to blame. And they put me back on a much more modern medication, which I am still on a tiny maintenance dose of to this very day, 1 milligram a day. And it works for me. And my GP, who I adore, would prefer for me to come off it. But as I say to him, Doc, I'm fine. I'm well. Why would I tamper with anything when I'm well? I can have a drink. I still enjoy a drink from time to time. You know, I'm well, I function, I work. I'm happy. If the meds work, take them. I have no medical qualifications whatsoever, so I speak merely from my own experiences. But there is no shame in taking the meds. There is no shame in having mental health struggles. Of course, in life, there is stress, and I've had a lot of it. And I don't think being a bit stressed is actually a mental health condition. I don't think having a bit of anxiety about getting up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, making sure the alarm is set and I do get up and I do get out of the door in time, I don't think being a bit anxious about that is a mental health condition either. There are stresses and strains and challenges in life that we have to deal with. But yeah, if you've got a mental health issue which is plaguing you and you cannot resolve, then there is no shame. In fact, I beg you to speak to someone. Speaking is the best thing, whether that starts off with your partner or a mate or a work colleague or the GP or a psychiatrist or a counsellor, whatever. Get the help you need, because if you are in the grip of a mental health episode, please let me tell you this. The sun will shine again, and the sun shines very brightly in my life at the moment, and I'm sure it will for you one day too.
I'm an advocate for everything you've just said there, so I'm really grateful that you've said that on this podcast. And then just one last thing about witness protection, because we hear about witness protection. What does it actually entail? Is there a curfew? Like, how does it really work?
No, I have no curfew, but to a certain extent, any risk that you incur is something that's potentially going to damage you. So it makes complete sense to abide by whatever kind of conditions or advice you are given. You don't want to be found, so don't go doing stupid things that might make you be found. It was hugely disruptive. Please don't anybody ever rush into it. If in the unlikely event in your life you need to consider it, don't rush into it. Think about the long term, because for me it was utterly unsustainable long term. And it was very, very miserable. It was the most miserable 2 years of my life. And I'm glad it's so far behind me. I'm also hugely grateful that I have the most wonderful woman in my life who actually I met through a bit of subterfuge when I was sort of still living in the safe house. But I've been hugely blessed to have a wonderful wife, wonderful family, loyal family, and friends. Only a small network of friends, but friends that have been there. And you know when you're in a lock-in psychiatric ward and your mate comes to see you on a Sunday afternoon and he might have travelled some considerable distance to come and see you, you know that is a proper mate. And when he sits there and you talk complete and utter bollocks to him because you're really unwell, right, for the couple of hours that he's there, and yet he comes back and he comes back, and then you see the smile on his face for the first time when you have a lucid and sensible and enjoyable conversation with that friend, you know that's a friend indeed.
Yeah, fair play. So we're now 2024. We've just had recent riots.
Yep.
Here's a question for you. The mainstream media are calling them race riots. I'm happy to roll with whatever you want to call them for the benefit of this interview. What would you like us to call these riots?
Well, Keir Starmer called them race riots yesterday, didn't he, when he went to Northern Ireland? He called them race riots. And before that, he used a very broad brush to label everybody involved in them as being far right. I don't like lazy labels. They don't fit everyone. And it can be used as a tool sometimes, I think, to suppress conversation, to suppress free speech. And I'm not a fan of that in any way, shape or form. So I'll just stick to riots.
How do you think they started? Without me putting my 2 pence worth in, because I just want to hear it from you.
Okay. If we rewind to July and the events in Terminal 2 at Manchester Airport, you will remember, I hope, that a short clip was released on social media of a police officer kicking a man in the head and stamping on his head. And that clip was only 3 or 4 seconds long. And it understandably caused a lot of outrage and a lot of debate on social media. About 3 or 4 days after that clip had been released, I think we got to see 23 seconds of some of the backstory to the kick in the head and the stamping on that man's head. And what we saw was two men lashing out fervently, disgustingly at police officers and female police officers being punched. And it was widely accepted that one of those police officers had received a broken nose. And then we found out that there was other incidents that took place on an aeroplane and other incidents that took place in a Starbucks before the footage that we've seen. There has been no footage released from the aeroplane or from Starbucks. So we still do not have the full picture in regards to what led to the events that we have seen. So nothing's been resolved. No charges brought yet. But that whole situation and the reaction to it, because two of the men that we saw brutally breaking a woman police officer's nose and lashing out like lunatics were brown-faced men. And, of course, we need to understand and not duck the issue that there are many people in this country, in fact, I would contend there are millions of people in our country who work hard, raise decent kids, pay their taxes, obey the law, and otherwise contribute to society, that harbour deep concerns about unfettered, illegal immigration into this country. I believe that many of those people also harbour concerns about the rise of Islam in the UK, fundamental Islamism, or Islamists, should I say, that they are concerned about, and a lack of integration by certain communities who do not appear to integrate into the UK. Reform got 4.1 million votes. Much of their platform was arguing about immigration. I therefore think it entirely reasonable and quite probably the truth that millions of people, and beyond the Reform voters, have concerns about the aforementioned things. So that Manchester Airport, for me, laid the fuse. It laid the fuse, and I was so convinced that major disorder was going to happen that I jumped on social media and I said, social cohesion is hanging by a thread. Suppressing the truth will not help. Don't say I didn't warn you. And what I mean by suppressing the truth is that we could have seen police officers' body-worn videos long before that longer clip was released. Greater Manchester Police could have broken with protocol, could have sensed the feeling in the nation, and could have put some of that out there to try and give backstory, context, dare I say it, truth about matters that led up to the police officer kicking and the stamping. And while I'm dealing with that, having done policing for quite a while myself, I have to say I find it very hard to find any justification for what that police officer did. Although, of course, I think we always need to remember that policing will never be perfect. And it will never be perfect because it's full of people. And people have flaws and people make mistakes and people get things wrong. That said, I would also like to see the Starbucks footage and any footage from the aeroplane. But that remains my position. So, that laid the fuse. Then, of course, we had the ghastly events of Southport on what for many was the first day of the kids' summer holidays. I'm a father of 3, all right, they're all grown up now. But you'd sit there as the summer holidays approach thinking, right, what are we going to do? So when are we going to be able to go on holiday? Can we afford it? Where are we going to go? What clubs can we get them into? What sport are they going to do? What days out can we have? Because you want to keep your kids amused, occupied, entertained, inspired during the long summer holidays. Imagine Imagine the excitement that must have been coursing through the veins of those beautiful young children as they were going to go to a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga event. I bet those girls were as excited could be at the very prospect of it. For that event to turn into such murderous bloodshed is, of course, vile beyond compare. But somebody has been charged in connection with that offence. I regard myself as a responsible broadcaster, so I'm not going to say anything more about it. We will have to wait and see. We will have to let justice run its course. Not long after those appalling events, somebody, and I would say probably a hostile actor to the UK, put out a tweet saying that a 17-year-old man called Ali al-Shakiri, who had come to the UK on a boat, like many other migrants into the UK that wash up at Dover every day, almost every day, had carried out the attack, and that he was therefore an illegal immigrant and the subject of interest by the security services. I can't remember whether they said MI6 or MI5, but that in essence was the tweet. In other words, naming somebody that they were saying was responsible for that attack, an illegal immigrant subject to interest from the security services. All of which was completely and utterly untrue. Not a word of that was true. But of course, once it's out there, we know what the internet's like. We know what social media is like. And it spread like wildfire, unfortunately. And I think it raised a lot of tension and a lot of concerns because emotions were running extremely high. I think just about everybody in the nation must have been touched in some way or another by hearing the dreadful news of that abominable attack. Then what happened was that the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Serena Kennedy, held a press conference because, yes, the 17-year-old had been arrested and she confirmed that. And she said that this 17-year-old was, and I quote, originally from Cardiff. Those were the exact words she used. Then what happened was people did their own digging, including the media. Now, to my mum, bless her, she's 95, and we are still the most incredibly lucky family to still have her. To people like my mum, and I think some others, probably of my age or a bit older, when you say a 17-year-old from Cardiff, people might conjure up an image of a flame-haired rugby player who sings in a male voice choir. Now, I know they're cliches, but to some people, that's the sort of image that they might conjure up. What, of course, was later discovered was that the 17-year-old, originally from Cardiff, was born in the UK to Rwandan immigrant parents. They might have come here entirely legitimately. We know nothing about them. But I think many people perceived the Chief Constable's originally from Cardiff as being sleight of hand. Like it was something that she was saying, perhaps almost as a distraction. Now, she might well say, actually, I said it for clarity purposes, because strictly speaking, what she said was the truth. But because there was nothing else behind it, because there was no mention of the parents being from Rwanda, for example, I think when people discovered that, they then thought, again, is there some suppression of the truth here? Is the establishment, in the face of a chief constable, trying to suppress the truth in some way, shape or form. So the fuse was laid by Manchester Airport, and the sparks were created by that entirely false tweet that went around, and people thinking that the Chief Constable of Merseyside was perhaps being a bit underhand and not perhaps as forthright as she otherwise could have been. And I think they were the sparks that lit the fuse, that then encouraged people stupidly, very, very stupidly, to go and throw bricks at police officers, to knock down people's front walls and launch bricks at mosques, for example. And we know what all the other law-breaking that went on, including from a clip that I saw where I believe somebody was trying to set fire to a Holiday Inn in Tamworth. So then, of course, we had Keir Starmer holding his first press conference with regards to the riots. And of course, famously, with a very broad brush, labelled the riots far right.
Farage riots were trending. Now, do you think Nigel Farage played any part in inciting those riots?
That title to the riots was given by a radio presenter who is the most sanctimonious person I have ever had the misfortune of listening to. Ludicrous.
It's a shocking accusation.
Yeah, it is, and it's, again, inaccurate. We have a problem in this country in that people who harbour concerns, like I've said, illegal immigration, the rise of Islam and a lack of integration, will be lazily called far right or racist, which is complete and utter nonsense for so many people. All right, I'm sure there are some racists who have concerns about illegal immigration, the rise of Islam and a lack of integration, but not everyone. I know so many people that harbour those concerns, and they are fine, law-abiding, upstanding members of the community. But you know what? They'd be afraid to have that discussion in a pub. And I think now what we've seen post the riots, with this huge mobilisation of the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts and the prisons to lock up rapidly, quickly, effectively so many people, I wish they'd do it for knife crime. I wish they'd do it for shoplifting. Nobody died in the riots. 3 people died of knife crime this weekend alone. Imagine what the nation might look like if there was a huge mobilisation of police officers with as much political will and policing vigour put into tackling knife crime. Imagine how many stop and searches 6,000 police officers could do if they went to those cities of ours that are so blighted, that have a tide of teenage blood flowing through them. Imagine how effective that might be against knife crime. Look at our high streets, so many of which are blighted by people walking into shops and helping themselves with those huge great laundry bags and holdalls that they fill up with alcohol, and some jump behind the ramp and nick all the cigarettes and the joints of beef and all the other expensive things, and then walk out without challenge and steal with impunity, turning people away from going to the high street. And then, of course, another huge matter of great concern, because the 3 people that I mentioned murdered this past weekend, all women. The stats last week, 50% increase in assaults against women on the underground system, the transport network, the buses, the tubes, the trains, let alone the streets, where women are harassed and assaulted, and worse, on a daily basis. Imagine if there was the political and the policing will to mobilise 6,000 officers to try and tackle those issues. Imagine how better the UK might become in a very short space of time. They've shown they could do it for the riots, and they had to. Well, let's have that political will. Oh, but hang on. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said just the other day, we're going to halve knife crime in a decade. Well, you stop the riots in a week. So why can't you halve knife crime in perhaps a month of really concerted effort, which you keep going, so that police officers patrolling the streets do not remain a thing of the past, but become a thing of the present, so that we have deterrence, so that people see police officers, they are visible, people might get to know them, they might actually get to like them. They might actually get to say good morning or good afternoon to them. They've shown they can do it for the riots. Let's do it for women, girls, shopkeepers, and people who are too frequently getting stabbed to death. Let's do it for them as well, shall we?
I agree. So, in short, your view is that these recent riots were sparked by your average person's concern for illegal migration and being lied to by the establishment. Is that a fair comment?
The fuse was laid by the Manchester airport events, and the sparks were created by that false tweet, the Ali al-Shakiri tweet, and what was perceived as sleight of hand by the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police. Of course, that is all against the backdrop of millions of people being concerned, rightfully so, understandably so. I think if you are not concerned about 500 people yesterday, about 700 people on Saturday, whatever it was, washing up on the shores of Britain without documents, people whose background we don't know if they've got any criminal records, we don't know where they've come from. I'm talking about we, the great British public. We don't know what their intentions are. We don't know how they're going to contribute to society, be that good or bad. And we never get the answers, do we?
No.
We never get told. Right? In fact, I think if you're not concerned about that, then I'd say, well, what things do concern you? Aren't you concerned about the state of our country? These people have all got to be housed somewhere. Surely they need to have money. Are they going to earn it, or are they going to be given it? And what are their intentions? Why are they coming to the UK?
They're passing other countries of safety to get here.
And I had this very conversation the other day when I was expressing thoughts very similar to these. And the radio presenter said to me, so these people that are anti-migrant, and I let him finish his sentence, and then I said, okay, we're going to rewind now to that banana skin that you threw me when you said these people that are anti-migrant. I said, they're not anti-migrant. Don't conflate the two. Don't call everybody who's concerned about illegal immigration as being anti-migrant, because that is quite simply incorrect. So many people that I know who have concerns about unfettered illegal immigration into the UK adore migrants, have married a migrant, love the bloke who's run the corner shop for the last 40 years since he fled persecution, love the boys down the curry house, the Muslim fellas that serve him a lovely chicken tikka dansak once a week. Not anti-migrant, but anti-illegal immigration. And yet lazy, invariably lefty presenters or journos will try and bracket you as such. I'm not going to throw a brick at a mosque. I'm not going to become a racist, vile, Islamophobic kind of dick. But I might just harbour concerns. And when we sit down and have a grown-up conversation on a podcast, I will speak freely like I'm speaking to you now. You could, of course, use the argument, well, in the mid-1930s, the rise of the Nazis didn't really affect anyone in the UK, did it? But they had concerns over it. Just putting that out there.
Islam. Policing. Riots. Large gatherings. Masses of people praying in the streets, which does cause a disturbance. How do you perceive the two-tier policing system that I think is now crystal clear? I don't think there's any argument anymore that there is a two-tier policing system within the UK. We've seen that in Rotherham, where the police are petrified to say and do anything against that faith compared to the likes of you and me. A born and bred British citizen, for me, they seem to be getting put second.
Don't ask the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, about two-tier policing, because he'll whack the microphone out your hand like he did, very irritated as he was the other day.
I see that.
And don't ask the Prime Minister, of course, because he says it doesn't exist. Okay? So no such thing. No such thing. Right. What there is, and I've been talking about it in the media for over 20 years, it's nothing new, there is inconsistent policing. And there will always be inconsistencies in policing because, again, it's down to people. I'll give you a little example, right? Somebody who's brand new out of training school might deal with two unruly kids in a completely different way to a 25-year veteran cop might deal with two unruly kids, right? So you could say that was inconsistent. However, I know the point that you're getting at. Is there two-tier policing in regards to what is good for one particular community does not apply to another? It's undeniable that there are inconsistencies in policing. You'll notice I use inconsistencies rather than two-tier because I've been saying about inconsistent policing for as long as I can remember.
Here's the thing then, inconsistent policing. So there was a press conference and there was a police officer and he greeted the nation in Arabic, and he also signed off in Arabic.
I know,
and which that's fair enough. But when police officers are addressing the Jewish community, for example, do they start and finish in Hebrew?
They'll have to now.
Well, they will.
They'll have to now. Yeah, I was very, very uncomfortable with that. I think it's entirely unnecessary. It's just trying to curry favour with people. And at the end of the day, policing is supposed to be done without fear or favour.
And you can see how that would antagonise people.
Of course, massively. Massively.
Going back to lazy labelling, the race riots, which the legacy media reported those riots as, they're so detached from day-to-day life for the likes of you and me that if they could have heard a conversation between me and some of my black and brown skin-coloured friends that also share the same concerns about illegal
immigration, the rise of Islam and a lack of integration.
Yes.
Ditto.
Well, again, not that I'm justifying or explaining myself to anybody, but it's just the establishment need to listen to these words. I have friends of different colours and faiths with the same concerns as you and me. How can you label it a race riot when there's other races that are equally as concerned?
So what do we do? So what do we do about it? Because neither of us hold elected office, and I will never run for elected office, by the way. So what we're going to do about it? Well, I'll tell you what I do about it. I have these conversations openly, not loudly, but openly in a pub with my mates, and we talk about it. And I don't care if somebody wants to look over their shoulder at us. If somebody wants to come up and brand us as racist or something, then they're very welcome to pull up a chair, and they would very soon realise what a foolish thing they'd just said.
That's the key.
So let's talk. Let's have these conversations. I'm not saying about going spoiling for a fight. Let's not be idiots, but let's have these conversations. Let's not be afraid to talk about our concerns. As long as we do it respectfully, lawfully, and maintain our dignity.
And tell me what you feel like the mainstream are doing to gag us.
Right, okay. So, scouring my phone, as I frequently do, looking at the internet. Right. So there's an article today on the BBC website, and the headline reads, "Protester jailed after chanting at police." If you actually read the article, the offences for which he got jailed include pushing a man into a police line, like being confrontational with the police, and other factors. Not that he chanted at the police. But you see, this is what the headline might make you think. Because there's not much of a stretch from protester jailed after chanting at police to protester jailed for chanting at police. And that's what people are going to think when they see that straight away. They're going to think he was jailed for chanting. They'd like to suppress the conversations that we've been talking about. Of that, I'm absolutely sure. And a headline like that is deliberately designed so that you might think, jailed for chanting at the police? Well, I better not chant at the police then. You can still chant at the police. You can still say what you want as long as you don't break the law. You can chant at the police all day long. There's no law against that. But that headline is deceptive, and it's designed to make you think that chanting at the police is illegal.
Well, they've now got people too scared to post their opinions as well, because they're jailing people for their Facebook posts and retweets.
But you've got to look at the entire sentencing speech. See what people have actually been jailed for, because you will find that people have been jailed for physical acts after they've posted something. Yeah? So it's not actually the post, albeit I do agree some people have been jailed for posts because they wrote stupid, daft, illegal things. If you tell people to rise up, grab a brick and throw it at a mosque, then you are an idiot and you're breaking the law. Let's be a bit more switched on than that. That is stupid. That is daft. You will go to prison. But free speech, as it was before the riots, has not changed. Don't fall for the trickery of the headlines. They want us to think that free speech is over. They want us to say nothing. They want us to be afraid to express our views on a podcast such as this.
You know, when you were stood on the front line, 1981, during the Brixton riots, and you're looking the other side of the shield, and you thought, I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
Yeah.
Because you saw injustice and double standards, inconsistent policing.
Yeah.
Do you think there'll be police officers now from recent events, from recent riots that were stood behind that shield, looking the other side at the British public, and do you think they might be thinking to themselves, I too have had enough of this. I don't want to be this side anymore because this isn't fair?
Well, police officers are resigning in record numbers. We know that. They simply can't recruit or retain the number of people that they need to at the moment. And if we would discuss the reasons behind that, we'd be here all night, maybe another time. But I'm sure that there are police officers that experienced the rioting in the last few weeks and they've gone, nah, this job's not for me anymore.
And police officers dancing at pride marches. Now, if you object to that or you raise a slight concern, does that make you a homophobe?
Put it this way. Some might choose to call me that, but I believe if you are going to police an event like a Pride March, and we know how much violence has been meted out on the gay community over the years, and if we look over the pond, let's remember the bombing of the Boston Marathon, wasn't it? I think that was inspired by homophobic hate. I'm old enough to remember the Admiral Duncan pub bombing and other atrocities committed against the gay community. If I was going to go and police a pride march, I would say to the organisers, don't expect me to be fluffy, flaky, dancing or painting my face. But I can tell you what you will absolutely be guaranteed from me is that I will be hyper vigilant throughout your event so you can dance, you can paint your face and you can have the most wonderful time. But me and any staff that I'm working with, or perhaps if I was supervising, for example, we will be hyper vigilant and we will be doing everything within our powers and our experience to keep your event safe. You go and have a great time. Protecting it's my job, not prancing about.
From a security background, that is word for word my exact view on the whole thing as well. No one can argue with that. And let's finish on knife crime. Who's stabbing each other the most? What community?
Tragically, if you look back over the last couple of years and beyond, the teenagers that are dying are overwhelmingly black, and they are being murdered overwhelmingly by black people. They are indisputable facts. Of course, The Guardian, I saw a headline today, is moaning because young black men are 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white people are. Well, if I was policing an area where young black men were being stabbed to death by young black men, I'd spend each and every working day stopping and searching young black men. But I'd do it politely, courteously, firmly, robustly, if need be. But I would tell everybody within that community, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to protect life, which is the fundamental core purpose of policing. Protect life and property, prevent crime, and where crime is committed, investigate it. Simple as that. It ain't a popularity contest, and too many of those quite frankly daft, highly educated senior police officers with letters after their name because they went to all the glittering red brick universities, including Oxford and Cambridge, have kind of manifestly forgotten that. It's not a popularity contest. If you want to be popular with people, investigate their burglary, car crime, phone theft, bike theft, fraud that's been committed on their gran, and other crimes. Investigate those. Turn up. Meet people. Say hello. Good morning, sir. Good morning, madam. I hear that unfortunately you've been a victim of crime. Now, what can I try to do about that? Do that. But policing turned its back on the moderate mainstream of Britain years ago when it stopped investigating all those crimes and instead and insultingly handed out crime reference numbers. You imagine coming home to your house that has been ripped asunder by some shitbag, unscrupulous, scabby burglar. And all you get from the police is a crime reference number. And the police wonder why they've got no respect anymore. They wonder why trust and confidence is tanking. Yes, of course, we all know about the tragic, appalling case of Sarah Everard and Britain's most notorious rapist, who was also a police officer that worked on the same unit as Sarah Everard's murderer. We know all about those cases. We also see all the other cases of cops going through the courts, a lot, charged with abominable, unforgivable crimes. Policing has got a very, very long way to go if it ever thinks it's going to get its house in order. And it won't get any better by getting fluffier, wokier, flakier, and treating it, as they have done for so long, as a popularity contest. You'll be popular when you do your job properly.
A, the stats don't lie, and B, I feel like the stats are there to protect and assist us to keep people safe. So if the stats are saying that it's predominantly black kids stabbing other black kids,
murdering black kids,
slaughtering them,
young black kids in London
with zombie knives and such like. Now, the media have got a responsibility to assist in reducing the death rate, but what they're doing is they're race baiting. So my point is, I know that there'll be Jamaican mothers that are delighted that black children are going to be more likely to be stopped and searched because they know that that person could potentially be murdering their child because the stats are there to help us. And here's the thing, so that I can't be deemed as biased. Independent paedophiles in the UK, I believe they're predominantly white middle-aged men. Now, if there's white middle-aged men hanging around primary schools, for example, I fully expect the police to stop them, search them and ask them, what are you doing here? And if they put their hands up and say, this is prejudice, this is racist, whatever they want to come back with, it's like, too bad. We're working off the stats because we're trying to keep everyone in the country safe. How can you argue with that?
But you see, most of those policing bosses, they don't know. They couldn't put an operation together. They couldn't catch a cold. They're very good with climbing the promotion greasy pole. They're very good at saying the right words in the right order when they go on promotion boards. They'll write you a wonderful 10,000-word dissertation on reflective practice. And they're very good at diversity, equality and inclusion policies, not to mention, of course, because on their way up that greasy pole, they filled out a spreadsheet or three. But when it comes to having practical, operational experience and a track record of catching and convicting people, nah.
How do we squash knife crime, or at least reduce it massively like it needs to?
It's multifaceted, and there isn't one simple answer. We can look at so many factors, can't we? Parenting, absent parenting, peer group pressure. But so much of it, I firmly believe, is around that whole postcode enforcement. And what does that come down to? Why is there postcode enforcement? Often because it's connected to the drug dealing. And then we go all the way back to my arguments for the legalisation and regulation of the drugs industry.
And can we just touch base? Violent crime against women is on the up, not mildly, but massively. Just to restore some old school values and principles. And remember, these women carry our children and we've all got mothers. So how about going back to opening the door for them, carrying their groceries, checking they're okay, rather than beating them up on the train, which seems to be happening more and more.
My heroes are my mum, single mum in the 70s, very tough gig. My sister, pioneering nursing, done incredible things. My wife set up the first domestic violence unit in Woolwich when she was in the Met, and so much more. Glittering career. And many other people, women in my life, utterly heroic and wonderful, wonderful people. My old mum instilled in me when I was a pup, manners maketh man. And so I will always do the aforementioned. I did hold a door open for a woman once upon a time and she tutted. Okay? I just said nothing. Because it said more about her than it did me, I think, and I'm not going to deviate from my behaviour.
Yeah, don't let that put you off.
Yeah, exactly, and it won't, and I will give up my seat on the train invariably for somebody who needs it more than me. I've taught my kids to do that, of course. Open doors, carry bags, carried a lady's very heavy suitcase onto the train this morning at Bleksley station. All those things are just my default position. And it's a bit selfish, really, because I always feel a bit better when I've done it. I always think, oh, yeah, I really enjoyed that, because I've done something for somebody else. So it makes me feel nice as well.
I'm exactly the same. I sometimes question, why did I do that? Was it for me or was it for them? But I think it doesn't matter. If you do a good deed, you do a good deed.
Yeah, exactly. But, So, no, my values and those kind of things remain as steadfast as ever. Although, of course, I'm getting to the age now where sometimes people offer me a seat on the train. Which absolutely breaks my heart. And I retort with, no, thank you very much. I'm younger than I look, which I am. But anyway, and sometimes that raises a chuckle.
Yeah. So to round off, if you want to be a man, stop bashing women and start taking better care of them.
Good grief. Who on earth? Who would even consider of insulting or assaulting or doing anything like to harm or harass a woman. You are no man.
It beggars belief, what I'm seeing at the moment within this country. It beggars, it's like we are absolutely out of control and we're putting our focus in the wrong direction.
Well, I am kind of a sickeningly optimistic sort of bloke. You know, I always try and think that better is to come. I'm finding that increasingly difficult when it comes to the state of this nation. But thank you very much for having me. I've had a great time. I've got a few things off my chest. So thank you for enabling me to do that. And who knows? Who knows? Maybe there's a few like-minded souls out there after all.
Well, here's to a better future for all races and individuals and cultures. May we all live in harmony and peace and all fight the same fight and push in the same direction. And today has been a joy. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers, brother.